The ballroom was filled with crystal chandeliers, the soft hum of violins, and the elegant chatter of society's elite. He stood tall among them all, Alexander Grant, a man whose name commanded respect, wealth, and envy. People whispered about his empire, about his success, about how he had risen from nothing to become one of the world's most powerful millionaires. But no one whispered about his heart, because to the world, Alexander had no heart left. Years of losses and betrayals had hardened him into a man who lived only for control and power. He had money, yes, but money was cold, and he had learned to live in that coldness. Yet, on that night, fate decided to strike. As the evening unfolded, the grand doors of the hall creaked open. A young girl, no more than 7 or 8, stepped timidly inside. She didn't belong here. Her dress was simple, her shoes slightly worn, her hair messy as if she had run through the wind to get here. People turned, murmuring in disapproval, their elegant masks of politeness cracking with irritation. But she didn't care. Her eyes, wide and desperate, scanned the room as though searching for someone, her little hands trembling at her sides. Then, suddenly, her gaze landed on a boy standing at Alexander's side. The boy was around 12, dressed in a finely tailored suit, his posture careful and trained, as though he had been raised in luxury all his life. He had been adopted by Alexander years ago, a quiet child with no memory of his past, only a note left with him in an orphanage. Alexander had taken him in, not out of love, but out of duty to a promise he once made to someone long gone. The boy had grown under Alexander's watch, shielded by wealth but never truly warmed by fatherly affection. Still, the boy had learned to smile, to carry the weight of expectations, even if loneliness sat quietly behind his eyes. And then it happened. The little girl gasped, her voice breaking the polished silence of the hall. She screamed, raw and piercing, words that would shatter Alexander's world forever. "Daddy, that's my brother." Every head turned. Glasses froze midair, conversations collapsed into stunned silence. The boy blinked in confusion, his young face tilting as he stared at the trembling girl pointing at him. Alexander felt his breath catch, his chest tighten, his heart pound against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The word struck him deeper than he could bear. His knees weakened, his hands shook, and before he knew it, tears streamed down his face, unstoppable, uncontrollable. The millionaire who had built empires, crushed competitors, and lived untouched by the world, collapsed in front of them all. The little girl rushed forward, her sobs echoing in the stillness. She clung to the boy's hand, whispering, "It's you, it's really you. Mama said you were gone but I knew. I knew you were alive." Her words spilled out, broken but certain, as though she had been holding them in for years. The boy stared at her, his eyes wide, confusion melting into something deeper, something buried that was now clawing its way to the surface. His lips trembled, and he whispered, "Sister," as if the word was foreign yet familiar, a memory locked away now cracking open. Alexander's chest ached. He couldn't breathe. Memories he had buried, faces he had tried to forget, and mistakes that had haunted his soul came crashing back like a wave he could no longer outrun. Years ago, there had been love, real love. A woman who had given him light, a family he thought he would build. But tragedy, greed, and his own ruthless ambition had torn it apart. He had lost her, and in that loss, he had lost himself. He had been told one child died, the other taken far away. He had believed it, or perhaps, he had chosen to believe it because it was easier than fighting the truth. And now, here they were. The truth, alive and breathing, staring back at him with innocent eyes that mirrored the woman he once loved. The room no longer mattered, the wealth, the people, the whispers. Nothing mattered but those two children, bound by blood, torn apart by fate, and now reunited by something greater than any empire Alexander could ever build. He dropped to his knees, his powerful frame shaking with sobs as he reached out to them. "Forgive me. God, forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have fought harder. I should have never let you go. His tears fell freely, his pride shattered, his soul exposed. For the first time in decades, Alexander Grant was not a millionaire, not a tycoon, not a man of steel. He was just a broken father, aching for the pieces of his family. The boy, hesitant but trembling with longing, took a step closer. The girl, innocent and full of the pure love only a child could carry, nodded through her tears. She looked at Alexander and whispered, "Mama always said, if we found you, we should forgive you. She said you were lost, but she believed one day you'd come back." Her words pierced him like sunlight breaking through a storm. The mother he had abandoned in his grief had still believed in him, still taught her children to love the father who had disappeared. The weight of it crushed him and healed him at once. He gathered the children in his arms, holding them so tightly as though they might vanish if he let go. His tears fell into their hair, his sobs shaking them all, but for the first time in years, his heart was not empty. Around them, the crowd watched in silence, their jeweled masks of indifference stripped away. For some, it was a scandal, for others, a tragedy. But for Alexander, it was redemption. His wealth had built him walls, but these children, his children, had torn them down with one cry, one scream that carried the truth of blood and love. That night, Alexander Grant was no longer the man people feared. He was the man who found his children, the man who collapsed under the weight of love and loss, the man who finally understood that no empire could ever compare to family. And in that moment, as he held them close, he vowed never to let go again. It was not the end of his story, it was the beginning. The beginning of a man who had lost everything but was given a second chance to rebuild, not with money or power, but with love stronger than any fortune could buy. And as he looked at his children, the tears still warm on his face, Alexander whispered a promise that came not from his empire, but from his soul: "Never again will I lose you. Never again will I let the world take you from me." The air was heavy that evening, the kind of night where chandeliers glowed like captured stars and every guest carried the weight of polished smiles and shallow conversations. In the grand ballroom, Alexander Grant stood as the pillar everyone admired and envied, a man sculpted by power and fortune, a millionaire whose empire stretched across cities and whose name carried weight even in silence. He looked untouchable, flawless in his tailored suit, his cold gaze scanning the room not for people, but for opportunities, as though life itself were a boardroom negotiation. To the world, he was the definition of success, but within him lived a silence, an ache that money could never quiet, though he had learned to bury it so deeply that even he sometimes forgot it existed. And yet fate, cruel and merciful, had been waiting for this night to tear down everything he thought he knew. The doors of the ballroom opened with a creak that didn't belong in such a perfect place, and into that golden light stepped a little girl no older than 7 or 8. She looked small, almost fragile, wearing a simple dress that clung to her like it had been washed and worn too many times. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair messy, her presence jarring against the sea of silk gowns and polished tuxedos. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, faces turned, brows arched in irritation, but the girl didn't flinch. Her eyes, wide and trembling, moved across the room as though she were looking for something she had lost long ago, and in that desperate searching, she suddenly froze. Her gaze locked on the boy standing quietly at Alexander's side. The boy was 12, dressed immaculately, his small frame carrying an air of discipline that had been drilled into him by years of growing under Alexander's roof. He had been adopted when he was just a toddler, left behind with no memories but a note scrawled with words no one could ever fully explain. Alexander had never truly embraced him as a father, though he had given him everything wealth could buy: education, security, opportunity. The boy had learned to smile politely, to speak carefully, but beneath it all, he carried an emptiness, an unspoken longing he couldn't name. The little girl's lip quivered, her small hands trembling at her sides, and then she screamed, a cry so sharp and raw it sliced through the entire ballroom, silencing violins, halting conversations, freezing glasses midair. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "Daddy, that's my brother." For a moment, the world stood still. The boy's eyes widened, confusion flooding his face, his chest rising and falling as though his heart recognized something his mind couldn't. Alexander's body went rigid, his breath trapped in his throat, his heart pounding violently, trying to escape the prison of his ribs. The word struck him with a force greater than any business blow, a force that shattered years of carefully built walls. His knees buckled, his hands shook. And before he could stop himself, hot tears poured down his face. He collapsed, his powerful frame folding into something small and broken, sobbing openly before the crowd that once worshipped his strength. Gasps echoed through the ballroom, people whispering behind jeweled hands, but the little girl paid no mind. She ran, her tiny feet slapping against marble, and threw herself at the boy, grabbing his hand as though afraid he might vanish if she let go. "It's you," she cried, her voice shaking but full of certainty. "It's really you. Mama said you were gone, but I knew you were alive. I knew I'd find you." Her words came like waves, spilling over themselves, desperate to close years of silence. The boy trembled, staring at her as if staring into a mirror that reflected a piece of his soul he had never seen. His lips moved, faltering, and then a whisper escaped, fragile but filled with recognition, "Sister?" The sound of it broke Alexander. His chest heaved, his vision blurred, his body crumbling under the unbearable weight of memory. Long ago, there had been love, love so fierce it had once made him human, a woman who had been his light, his anchor, the only person who saw Alexander before the world turned him into a machine of ambition. Together they had dreamed of a family, a life not ruled by wealth, but by love. But life had been cruel. Greed, betrayal, and his own relentless hunger for success had ripped it away. He had been told one child was gone forever, that the other had been taken far away, and he had chosen to believe it, because fighting meant facing pain he couldn't bear. He buried it all, turned his heart into stone, and let the world see only his empire. But here they were. His children. His blood. Alive. Breathing. Looking at him with the same eyes as the woman he had lost, the woman who had once believed in the man he used to be. He staggered forward, falling to his knees before them, reaching out with hands that trembled as though unworthy of touch. His voice cracked, raw and broken, "Forgive me, please, forgive me. I should have fought harder. I should have never let you go." His tears fell freely, dripping onto the marble like confessions too long silenced. The boy hesitated, torn between the father he had known and the truth unraveling before him. The girl, her innocence untainted by bitterness, wiped her own tears and whispered, "Mama said if we found you, we should forgive you. She said you were lost, but one day you'd come back." Her words pierced deeper than any blade. The woman he had abandoned in grief had still taught her children to love him, still carried faith in the man who had disappeared into the shadows of ambition. Alexander's sobs grew heavier, the weight of shame pressing him down, but in that weight there was something else, hope, fragile and flickering, but alive. He pulled the children into his arms, clutching them desperately, his tears soaking their hair as his body shook with decades of regret. For the first time in years, warmth returned to his chest, a pulse of love stronger than any empire he had built. Around them, the grand ballroom no longer mattered. The crowd, the wealth, the whispers, all faded into insignificance. For Alexander, there was only this, a daughter's cry, a son's recognition, and a chance at redemption he never believed he deserved. The mighty millionaire had fallen, but in his fall, he found what he had lost all along. He looked at them with eyes still blurred with tears and whispered, a vow carved from his soul rather than his fortune, "Never again will I lose you. Never again will I let the world take you from me." And in that moment, Alexander Grant was not a man of money, not a figure of power, but a father, broken, redeemed, and reborn through the love of the children who had found him when he was too lost to find himself.